Okay, so I have a question for you guys. Is the population of Venezuela greater or fewer than 65 million? Don't answer it, just write it down. Write down yes or no if the population of Venezuela is greater than 65 million. Now answer this question. How many people do you think live in Venezuela? Just write down your guess. Now you're probably thinking, Venezuela, what the heck does that have to do with anything, right? I don't really know anything about Venezuela. I don't have South American country populations memorized. And you start to think in your head, wait a minute, Venezuela, what do I know about Venezuela? I know what their flag looks like. I know they speak Portuguese. I think they speak Portuguese. Hugo Chavez, I think maybe was from Venezuela. But the population figures, you really have no idea, right? Like most normal people don't know that, the answer to that. But what you do have and what is in your head is the figure that I gave you, which was 65 million. And that figure influences how you answer the second question, which is what is the population of Venezuela? So you're more likely to guess closer to 65 million because that's the only information that you have to go on, regardless of whether or not 65 million has anything at all to do with the actual population of Venezuela. By the way, the answer is that the population of Venezuela is around 32 million. I'm going to share with you a study that was done about this, the way that you use data and information to influence other people. And the skill that we're going to talk about next is called anchoring. And this comes from a very interesting study that was done by Drazen Prelak and Dan Ariely at MIT in 2006. And Dan Ariely writes about it in his book, Predictably Irrational. And here's what the experiment looked like. The researchers would hold up a bottle of wine or a textbook or a cordless trackball and then describe in detail how awesome that thing was. Then each student had to write down the last two digits of their social security number as if it was the price of the item. So if the last two digits of their social security number was 11, then the bottle of wine was priced at $11. If the two numbers were 88, the cordless trackball was $88. And after they wrote down the pretend price that was based on their social security number, they bid on what they thought the real price was. This anchoring effect from writing down the last two digits of their social security number scrambled their ability to judge the actual value of the items. People with high social security numbers paid up to 346% more than those with low numbers. So people with numbers from 80 to 99 paid on average $26 for the trackball, while those with numbers 0 to 19 paid around $9. So a very interesting study on anchoring, and that's what we're going to talk about next, is anchoring, how does it work, and most importantly, how can you use it to your benefit? I'm going to walk you through a few examples and show you where it's used in your everyday life, and you're never going to look at pricing in the same way again after this module. Here's how it works. The first piece of information that is shared is the most influential. That's why it's called an anchor, because it anchors what you're thinking. You share information that influences the other person to think about your situation in a way that is more favorable to you. It's not lying, it's not making up information, it's identifying information that you can use to influence the other person. The information doesn't have to be directly related to your situation in order to work, as is proven by the experiment with the auction. When you start higher, and we're going to talk about exactly how you do this, anchoring creates perceived value. And anchoring often prompts people to say to themselves, maybe this is worth more. Now here's some examples from your everyday life. How many of you have walked into a store, if you shop at like Banana Republic or Gap, this is like every single day, where there's a 40% off sale going on. And this 40% off sale anchors you to the higher number that you see on the price tag. So you say you see a suit jacket, it's $198, but it's 40% off. It's such a deal. Therefore, using that higher number that's on the price tag anchors you to think that it's worth more. Maybe you go shopping and walk into a store and see a really cool leather jacket or winter jacket that's like $1,000. And you would never spend $1,000 on a jacket. But the salesperson walks up to you and says, guess what? Today, this jacket is 40% off. It's only $600. Or it's 60% off. It's only $400. And because you were anchored at that higher number of $1,000, your brain can't help but think it's such a good deal, I can't pass it up, even if you had no intention of spending that kind of money on a jacket. Now, another way that this is used in your everyday life is in restaurants. Now, this is a very common practice that restaurants use when they want to sell more of a $40 bottle of wine. They put specials, there are almost always three of them. There's a $60 bottle of wine, a $40 bottle of wine, and a $20 bottle of wine. And here's what your brain does. Well, I can't spend $60 on a bottle of wine. That's ridiculous. But I don't want to be seen as being cheap to my date. So I won't buy the $20 bottle of wine. But in comparison to the other two, $40, I'll settle on that. That seems reasonable. Or you may see it in a steak restaurant, where you see 3 steaks on the menu, 3 specials, and usually they're highlighted in the center of the menu. The first steak is $22.99. Wow, that's kind of pricey. The second steak, is only $14.99. And the third steak is $9.99. Well, you don't want to seem cheap, so you're not going to go for the $9.99. But in comparison to $22.99, $14.99 seems pretty reasonable. This is another example of anchoring. And restaurants do it. It's actually pretty interesting that restaurants do it when they want to sell more of the middle product. And they put it in the middle intentionally because people are statistically more likely to go for that one. Now, remember when in our module around being clear, we talked about how to set your target. And this is an important part of being clear about what you want. That you're going to set your goal, and your goal is where you want to end up. And then you're going to go higher than your goal because this is where you're going to start. And you're going to move down toward your goal when you need to build in some room to move. So starting higher is where, this is the final piece in this puzzle, is where your anchor comes in. When you want to start higher than your goal, you can use an anchor to start to expand the other person's mindset around what is possible. Now, this is all really interesting from a behavioral psychology standpoint, but how do you actually use this in your everyday life? And that's what we're going to talk about next, is how exactly do you use the skill of anchoring? Okay, let's say you're going to ask for a raise. This is a very common situation. You've done the research and you know approximately what your job should pay. You haven't been able to find the exact same job description as what you have. And in fact, that's probably good that you find a variety of jobs that have similar responsibilities to yours that you can use as a higher starting point. And you would say something like this: I found a number of jobs with skills that are similar to mine that pay up to, and you say the higher number. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly the same job that you are applying for, but that number becomes your anchor, and you want it to be in the other person's subconscious, because even if they're not talking specifically to you about that number, it's there as an anchor in the back of their mind. And this has been studied over and over again, that you are statistically more likely to get a higher salary, a higher pay rate when you use this. So it may sound a little scary, but it does work. Okay, let's say you are negotiating a deadline with your peer or project specifications or anything that has a time on it. And you say something like this: wow, a project of this magnitude typically takes 3 weeks. Or it may sound like, I work on projects like this all the time and they typically take 3 weeks. Now, 3 weeks is your anchor. You may know that there's no way you're getting 3 weeks to do this project. It's just never going to happen. But 3 weeks becomes what lives in the back of their mind and subconsciously is there as your anchor. So even if your peer wants it next week and is like, 3 weeks, what are you talking about? Your anchor automatically makes him think through the implications of getting it in 3 weeks. And statistically, you are more likely to end up at 2 weeks or even 1 week if they wanted it tomorrow when you use an anchor in this way. It's living there in their subconscious and they cannot help it. So I want you to think about what situation you could use this in if you have a deadline or a conversation coming up that you're working on, and make some notes in your workbook.